What is the origin of the universe? How was it created? As you gaze at these incredible images taken with a Hubble Space Telescope, ask yourself how something so vast and magnificent could have come into being. Do you think it's possible that something so complex and infinite could form from the random interactions of matter and energy after the Big Bang? Now ask yourself, what is the origin of my own self-awareness? Do you really believe that when you die, you're dead? Human beings have wondered and debated these questions for millennia, but they have particular resonance at this juncture in our planetary history. The population of our planet, now over 6 billion, is approaching critical mass. The consciousness of humanity is poised for a potential leap in awareness. But around which ideas will the new consciousness form? Will it be the same tired old memes of scarcity, competition, and conflict? Or can humanity break loose from the bondage of old thought patterns and create sustainable societies where all may achieve happiness and prosperity? The answers to the direction of humanity's future and the origin of the universe itself lies in the answer to the question, what is consciousness? That is the subject of this short movie. The ultimate question is, does your self-awareness depend on material structure, or does consciousness exist independently of physical bodies? How mankind resolves that question will determine the fate of our planet for the next 1,000 years. How did the physical world come into existence? Some cosmologists suggest that all of the energy in the universe originated in a very small region of space called a singularity, and then, suddenly, there was a gigantic explosion which propelled that energy outwards. This theory and its offshoots is called the Big Bang theory. The law of conservation of energy, however, states that energy can neither be created nor destroyed. If that is so, then all of the energy in the entire universe must have existed without reduction or increase since the beginning of time. The question is, how did the singularity come into existence in the first place? To get around this problem, some suggest that the building blocks of the physical world are one-dimensional extended objects called strings. You may have heard of this. It's called string theory. A string is a very tiny amount of energy that vibrates at specific frequencies. In string theory, the necessity for singularities are avoided. Others say that our universe may have been created from another, older universe. It is also suggested that the universe originated in some sort of undetectable quantum excitement at unimaginably small scales. Nobel physicist John Wheeler, back in the 1960s, imagined that space-time has a foaminess to it, with sudden changes that could create infinitesimal wormholes and quantum black holes that evaporate almost instantaneously. All of this activity would be far below the level of detection of even our most powerful scientific instruments. Quantum field theory says that the fabric of space itself contains a sea of undetectable virtual particles, winking in and out of existence. This scientific speculation is fascinating, but no matter how deeply we take this process into the microcosmic world, or how far back we go in time, we butt up against the fundamental quandary that it is impossible to create something from nothing. At some point we have to ask, how did the first something get created? The idea that the universe originated in some sort of infinitely small, undetectable process is valuable, however, because it blurs the boundary between matter and a pure creative potential. Such ideas bring us closer and closer to an undetectable and invisible creative principle. Professor Krishnamurthy says, the universe was created by transformation of something which was latent before that. Creation is just a manifestation of what was unmanifest before. Something unmanifest would also be invisible to our senses. So in quantum physics we have, almost, a meeting of the minds between science and metaphysics. Science and religion are not so far apart. The Bible tells us, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God." What does that mean? It expresses the idea that the universe began as a fundamental vibration, a word, which came forth from a higher, non-physical consciousness. This primordial vibration of the universe has been called the Om in Eastern thought. Quantum physics acknowledges that the observable universe and the particles in it are just an excitation of an underlying quantum field. In string theory, matter and energy are the manifestation of vibrating loops of string. Common to all of these concepts is the idea that the material universe is fundamentally vibrational in nature. This idea leads to a powerful new way of looking at the universe and life, which we will expand upon in future movies. The point is that prior to the arising of a quantum field, or a vibration, or anything material is the creative principle. We call this creative principle consciousness. What is consciousness? Science says that consciousness is biologically based. In other words, that your self-awareness originates within your brain, and that when your body dies, you die. It is said that consciousness proceeds forth from the electrochemical activity within the brain. But this argument breaks down for the simple reason that matter cannot create matter. We then get involved in unanswerable questions like, which came first, the chicken or the egg? The answer, of course, is that both chicken and egg are things. In order for even the tiniest bit of matter or energy to exist in the first place, it must have been created. But who or what is responsible for the creation of matter and energy? Because matter cannot create other matter, then logically, that which creates must be non-material. Awareness itself must be non-physical in origin. A human being is first and foremost a spiritual being, temporarily associated with a physical body. This concept has been well understood by almost every culture in the history of our planet. It is not far-fetched. Indeed, the insistence that self-awareness terminates upon death of the body is the nutty idea. Why is it so important to understand our spiritual nature? Because behind the greed, the wars, the grasping for resources, and the ills of our human societies lies a fundamental untruth: the belief that consciousness is dependent upon biology. This is the big lie. The belief that inevitable extinction of self-awareness is the fate of every human on Earth creates an almost undetectable, deep-rooted anxiety within all who believe so. Such an idea leads inevitably to competition and conflict, for one is operating under the false assumption that there is only a very little time to live, and then the extinguishing of your very soul. This scenario is enough to unconsciously terrify even the most optimistic person. If the creative principle is non-material, then it must have been before the beginning of the universe, before time itself. This is not such a hard concept to understand. When you dream at night, you find yourself in all sorts of situations and doing all sorts of things without your physical body. You really don't notice the passing of time. So let's go back in time, before the beginning of the universe. I want you to pretend that you were conscious before there were atoms, or bodies, or planets, or stars, or galaxies. Before time itself. Imagine that you are a timeless being, complete within yourself. Since there is nothing to look at, you are aware of nothing outside of yourself, yet you feel a sense of complete fulfillment, sort of like floating on a completely calm ocean in a perfect state of serenity. If nothing existed at all, how would you begin the creative process? You are just hanging out, and it's really boring because there's nothing to play around with. You've got no toys, no games, and no friends. You are like a newborn baby. You have no idea of physics or chemistry or what a planet looks like or even what an atom looks like because they haven't been invented yet. Suddenly, you have an idea. Has that ever happened to you? You're just sitting there and all of a sudden something pops into your head. Boom! What happens? You have just created the first thought. The first thought is an unimaginably tiny little vibration or packet of energy, but even so, it is perfectly real to you. Just like in a dream when you imagine something and it's real. For simplicity's sake, we'll call it a particle, the most basic quanta of energy in the universe. We're going to give you a personality because, after all, you are conscious, and conscious beings have personalities. Let's call this personality Hal. Hal is a conscious being, you, who just doesn't happen to have a body, because bodies haven't been invented yet. We'll say that Hal is a him. Of course, consciousness doesn't have gender, only physical bodies have gender. But in order to make things easier, we'll give Hal a gender. The ladies may decide to call Hal something nicer, like Hallie or Halo. Hal, through the creative magic of the animating principle, has broken through the subtle barrier between a pure, creative potential and something physical. Hal stares in wonder at what he has created. At first, he really doesn't know how he did it. So he tries again and voila! Hal now has two particles in his universe. The first thing Hal notices is that the two particles are ever so slightly different from each other. Why is that? Because in order for there to be two separate particles, each must be unique. Otherwise, they would be the same particle and occupy the same space. Hal also notices that the space between the particles isn't empty. Each of the particles is cradled within a subtle, glowing energy that surrounds them and occupies the space between them. Hal realizes that the two particles change their relationship to each other, creating movement. Hal feels affinity for his particles because each one is his own thought. Hal understands that in its own way, each particle is alive. Even so, there is an undeniable individuality to each of them that just emphasizes Hal's own awareness of himself as separate from them. Here we have the basic quandary of a physical universe: separation. Hal understands that just as his two particles can move relative to each other, he has the capability of moving to each particle and looking outward from that particle to the other. Now Hal is really having fun. Hal has created the universe's first game. Hal isn't really moving, of course. He is simply being, through the power of his own intention. That is what Richard Bach called perfect speed. Hal wants to look through particle A, and like magic he's there, just as we do when we dream. He does the same with particle B. In a mind-blowing realization, Hal comprehends that he has complete freedom to be anywhere he wants. Hal also sees that the scenery looks different depending upon where he is. Hal is learning viewpoint and perspective. For the first time, Hal realizes that he is unlimited. In other words, he can see that particle A must occupy a fixed position in space at any one time, and the same for particle B. But Hal notices that he seems to be outside of space and time altogether. How can this be, he wonders. Hal doesn't have the answer to that, but he enjoys the feeling of freedom. Hal understands that freedom is generated from limitation. For without his two limited particles, the idea of freedom is not possible. Infinity, therefore, is dependent on finiteness. Let's say Hal decided that he didn't like the second particle. He says, "I want to destroy that particle." What happens? Well, the very act of thinking the thought, "I want to destroy that particle," creates another particle. Now there are three particles. Hal is astonished. "Why can't I get rid of particle 2?" Hal says. That thought, of course, immediately creates a fourth particle. After several dozen attempts, Hal is a veritable zoo of particles all dancing around each other. Hal laughs and understands that a creator can only create. Hal realizes that destruction is an impossibility. Hal now understands that expansion is inevitable. Here we have the genesis for great wisdom. Wise ones throughout history have understood that to resist something is to make it bigger. That is why successful people concentrate only on the creation of what is wanted and never on the destruction of what is not wanted. In an expanding universe, contraction is only an apparency. Something that diminishes is just changing form, like the log that burns and turns its energy into heat. Hal decides that his disorganized jumble of particles is messy, so he begins to think of clever ways to rearrange them. When Hal goes to A and looks out at B, he realizes that he has a line of sight between A and B. To his delight, Hal understands that he can quantify the distance between particle A and particle B. Hal has made the universe's first scientific discovery. Just for the fun of it, Hal decides to take his particles and arrange them all at exactly the same distance away from himself. To his delight, he sees that he has created a circle. Hal now understands the concept of beauty. He can see that his circle is an elegant creation and looks much better than the mess he had before. Hal decides to find particles on his circle that are the same distance away from each other that A is to B. To his delight, he discovers that there are exactly 6 particles, all equally spaced around the circle. Hal has created a hexagon, a 6-sided, 2-dimensional figure. The hexagon is found in nature in the honeycomb, in crystals, and in snowflakes. Hal finds 4 equally spaced particles on his circle and gets a square. After some thought, Hal finds 5 equally spaced particles on his circle and gets a pentagon. Why are such simple geometric figures so important? Well, the construction of human DNA is based upon them. Take a look at this diagram of a human nucleotide. A nucleotide is the basic unit of DNA. Without getting too technical, you can see the square-shaped group of atoms at the left. It has 1 phosphorus atom, the P, surrounded by 4 oxygen atoms, the O's, in a diamond or square-shaped pattern. The middle structure of the nucleotide is a pentagon, and the upper group is shaped like a hexagon. The N is a nitrogen atom, and the C is a carbon atom, for those who are interested. Nature actually uses Hal's simple but powerful geometries in the building blocks of life. Although Hal is pretty smart, he's not omnipotent. In his quest for knowledge and growth, he makes mistakes just like you and me. For the first time, Hal feels frustration. He is now experiencing emotion. Emotions result from decisions or choices about something. Hal is amazed once more, for before the first thought, he felt blissful all the time. In his new universe, Hal understands that the concept of limitation not only applies to physical matter, but also to his state of being. At first, Hal begins to think that he himself is limited, but after a little thought, understands that only if he begins to identify himself with his creations can he feel restricted, inadequate, or imperfect. Hal laughs and laughs, for the idea that he is not now perfect seems to be a funny joke. One day, Hal is playing around with a circle and discovers something truly astonishing. By flipping the circle around on itself, he creates a sphere, like so. Hal has just created the universe's first three-dimensional figure. By finding points on the sphere, Hal creates more three-dimensional figures. These 5 structures are called the Pythagorean solids, or Platonic solids. In nature, the first 3 appear in crystals. The last 2 appear in certain viruses. On the left, for example, is some common table salt. In the center is how the atoms inside the salt crystal line up. You can see that the second of these simple structures contains the first inside it. The complex always evolves from the simple. Hal could never have gotten this far without first making the easier stuff. Evolution is an inherent and natural property of thought and is reflected in the structures of our material world. That which exists now was built upon that which came before. Eventually, after a very, very long time, Hal's simple sphere might look like this. As Bill Murray says in Groundhog Day, maybe God isn't omnipotent. He's just been around so long, he knows everything. "16 billion years after Hal created his first particle, we look through our telescopes at the big wide universe and ask, who or what created all of this beauty and magnificence? As we watch the news on TV, we ask ourselves, why have we made such a mess of things on our planet? Well, we've made a mess of things because we've forgotten who we are. We've become too serious about our life on Earth. We've somehow been convinced that the physical body is all there is, and that life ends upon termination of the body's existence. The path of a human life can be likened to a circle. At point A on the circle is birth. You go around the circle of life, and you arrive at death, which is at point A. Point A is both the arrival and departure point for something eternal, the divine consciousness that is you. Yes, you are divine. Despite what you may have been taught, you don't just go around once. The death of the body results in a glorious return to complete joy, and an awareness of every experience you've ever had. Why? Because consciousness in its native state is non-corporeal. When you leave the physical body, you are in fact returning home. In this movie, we have suggested the idea that the physical world is ultimately composed of thought, and that the inherent nature of matter and energy is itself conscious on some level. In that case, there would be no separation between consciousness and the material world. The two would essentially be different aspects of the same unifying principle. The concept of the ultimate unity of the physical with the spiritual has been understood by every culture throughout our planet's history. It's a concept whose time has come. It leads to the idea of cooperation and harmony instead of competition and conflict. Death is just an illusion. That which dies is only the physical husk, the shell that allows each one of us to experience physically, like the leaves of the tree that fall and blossom forth again in the spring. That which we are, the life force that animates the leaf, the animal, and the human, is eternal, glorious, and magnificent. Many of us have been taught that the universe is a cold, uncaring place, and that human nature is savage and barbaric and must be controlled. As a consequence, we have built our societies around the idea of conflict, competition, and scarcity. But what if these ideas are false? What if the universe has been set up to support our choices? What if the fundamental nature of every human being is positive, not negative? In that case, a change in thought and belief will inevitably lead to a beneficial change in our personal experience and in our societies. If the material world is indeed just a reflection of a much vaster consciousness, then each and every human being interfaces directly with this divine intelligence. The law of attraction tells us that like attracts like. This means that our thoughts and beliefs really do have meaning, and that the choices we make affect how our lives go. It means that each and every human being is empowered. It means that positive change is not impossible or even difficult, and that your dreams can come true. Ladies and gentlemen, it is time for each one of us to step into our power as individuals. The basic nature of a human being is spiritual, and the universe is set up to support our choices. The human race is not destined to struggle, compete, and fight each other forever. These are simply the choices we have made in the past, but we no longer have to be slaves to our past. The power of any group comes from the individuals in that group. Over the past 5,000 years, we have looked to leaders and authority figures to guide us. The time for that is now past. These thought forms are a remnant of the planetary cycle that is now rapidly coming to a close. As the population of our species reaches critical mass, we have a unique opportunity to create an entirely new paradigm of thought on our planet, one based upon individual empowerment, cooperation, and abundance for all. But in order for these ideas to take root, the soil must be prepared, one heart and one mind at a time. That is the purpose of this movie, to remind you of how powerful and magnificent you really are. You don't believe it? Well, that's because you've been listening to others, instead of consulting that powerful and divine kernel of wisdom that lies within you. Just think, if everyone on our planet understood the truth of their spiritual nature, we could transform our societies almost overnight. This is not some airy-fairy dream. It is eminently practical. In a world of almost instant communication, we are just a few thoughts away from creating an Earth where all can be prosperous without harming our planet. Within the unacknowledged special access programs is technology based on a new frontier physics that can, when released, solve our energy problems and eliminate pollution and poverty. As a planetary society, we have approached the fork in the road. One way leads towards more and more poverty and conflict, and the other leads to cooperation and prosperity. Which road will we choose, ladies and gentlemen? Don't think for a second that your decision isn't vital. It is. The example you set is observed by everyone you come into contact with. The law of attraction tells us that we always get the governments we deserve. In the past, we have allowed others to make our decisions for us, and we cannot blame them if those decisions have not been the right ones. The power of even one individual to positively affect others is enormous. The power of an idea is far mightier than the power of the sword. You can make a difference in your own life and in the lives of everyone you interact with. The time for spiritually aware people to hide in fear is over. It is now time to let your light shine, and in doing so, create a better world. Your future and the fate of our planet depends upon it. Send the link to this movie on to your friends and family members. All of us dream about a society that works together for happiness and prosperity for all. This is no longer a pipe dream, but a real possibility through the magic of the internet. As individuals joining together, we can discard old belief systems that are no longer serving us and change the face of Earth.